there's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world. Ajde, majkata!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
Yeah, I saw the news in Kosovo as well. I'm not sure what's happening. It's like the Kumanova thing with a group getting themselves hauled in, I guess, in a holy place. I haven't heard about
It's a
this.
monastery in
North
Kosovo, northern Kosovo, North Kosovo, near Mitrovica. So
Northern North Macedonia.
Exactly. So.
Yeah, I haven't heard about this monastery. I'm not sure how important it is, whether the Kosovars can start shooting inside. And apparently they have killed a bunch of the Serbs already.
Mm-hmm.
The Albanians are, of course, saying that it's Russians
of course.
Mixed with the Serbs to justify.
Actually, Vladimir Putin
them.
is in there, is part of the group. So.
Of course. And Prigozhin is there.
Prigozhin. Back from the dead.
You didn't really believe that he was really killed, right?
Yeah.
You don't buy that, do you?
Well, who knows? We'll see. But so and of course everybody's upset that Chris Hill, our ambassador in Belgrade, isn't saying too much. And everybody's, who was it? James Pettifer, I think, is that his name? The professor on Twitter.
Yeah.
He was saying that is this the long-awaited or the long-spoken about, military destabilization of Kosovo? Anyway, we'll.
It's a lot of tensions here. I think we even have some soldiers in Kosovo, as Macedonia. So it's possible we have to get involved in between. Fight with the Učaka against the Serbs, which would be the next level.
Oh dear, yeah.
Of our. We first went from allies with the Serbs to neutral, to Albanians attacking us, to now fighting with the Albanians against the Serbs. It could happen. I mean, I don't think they'll get involved for real, but let's see how this escalates and if it escalates.
If it escalates, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. That was what hit me first on when I finally fired up the computer this morning to look at what was going on in the world in the Twitter sphere or X sphere, I guess, as we should call it now. But we were gonna talk about, I had suggested let's talk about the growing corruption within the Ahmeti crime family, and it's really being exposed more and more, and maybe that's something that we can talk about later or future podcasts. And then, of course, Skopje being the capital, European cultural capital in 2028.
Yeah.
So that's all lovely, wonderful. But then, you had talked about. Our
and everybody had talked about.
Yeah, this.
And everybody talks only about this.
Yes. So what's going on in VMRO as we begin this episode? I think it's 161 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I am not in Skopje, Macedonia. I was there a few weeks ago, and it was great catching up with you. But I'm.
And you said laid the foundation for all this huge confrontation in VMRO now. You
exactly. No,
you gave the
I got out.
Okay to start the plan of deposing Gruevski and the legacy of Gruevski and starting a fight between him and Mickoski.
Well, yeah.
And you came home safe before everything started.
Exactly. Well, which is funny because when I go overseas, my friends here think I'm out, taking care of doing a wet job or something.
Taking care of business.
Exactly. So, yes, but neither of which is true, just for the record. But anyway.
Yes. Yeah. You would tell us if it were otherwise.
So, what's going on? So, VMRO, Mickoski, Gruevski. Is this a simple spat? Is there something real here? Of course, then we have to throw in Dewey and SDSM and their role in all this. And then, of course, all of this revolves around our contractual obligation to talk about Bulgaria. So essentially this boils down to that, correct? This idea that the government doesn't have enough votes to pass these new changes to the constitution that would include Bulgarians. It needs some VMRO members, and now the idea, the talk, I guess, is, or it's not just talk, it's in the open, I guess, between Mickoski and Gruevski of dropping charges against Gruevski so that he can come back and split the VMRO basically in two and get enough votes to pass the Bulgarian amendments. That's as simple as it is, correct?
Yeah, that's the initial
Yeah.
explanation. We're debating several details.
Yeah.
So it all started when SDSM and DUI, without involving VMRO, but without much active opposition from VMRO, adopted changes to the criminal code, which reduce penalties for abuse of office, abolishes one crime, one charge, which covers abuse of office. It's like a made-up, like a broad charge of criminal association, which does not really mean anything. Just just an easy way to add more to the years of prison that an official would have to serve if charged. Reduce the time in which these charges go defunct, reach statute of limitations, I think is the English term.
Yep, statute of limitations.
And it all happens, and it all happens days after Escobar was in Skopje.
Pablo?
So it's, the other one.
The other one,
nephew.
right, yes.
Yeah. So it's very suspicious, right?
Right.
And there is no reason to do this. Why would you reduce penalties for public office holders? Why not do something populist instead? And it's debatable how realistically this helps Nikola and the other dozens of VMRO officials who are charged by SDSM in this completely politicized kangaroo court system, which we have since 2015, when the Special Prosecutor's Office was set up with the purpose to destroy VMRO and bring SDSM to power and change the name and the identity of the country. Mm-hmm. So we're not sure how much it would help them. There are different explanations, but it looks like they will be helped at least a little bit, some of them a lot. SDSM people will be helped by this as well. They have a lot of corrupt officials who are staring at the possibility of having their own kangaroo trials soon after they're out of power. DUI people will be helped with all the corruption scandals against DUI, which you mentioned at the start. Everybody was accusing everybody else that you passed this to serve your own interests. Well, you didn't oppose this. It will even help some of Mickoski's people. Very few of Mickoski's people have been charged, but still there are people who have been charged close to him. So it could help him as well. And as this was going on, there were some protests in the public, like the university law faculty students have been protesting against this. NGO people, remaining college revolution people were protesting, those who not work directly for the government and can still criticize things sometimes. Mm-hmm. And as this was happening, we had our friend Michael Martens. You know him personally, no? The German journalist from the Fratricidal Allgemeine Zeitung. He's an okay dude. Yep. He's like one of the few, nominally conservative journalists in the Balkans. He visited Nikola in Budapest and wrote an extensive article about the problems, about the trials against Nikola. And in detail, Nikola would tell him, this is where the judge is corrupt, he has a conflict of interest, comes from this deep communist family, stuff like that. And this is where he violated the court proceedings, and this is how this should be overturned in the future. It was a huge article with a lot of details about how he was wronged and to justify his asylum status. So now he interviews Mickoski here, and he's very complicated. He publishes things under paywall in German. So then Deutsche Welle, which is not a fair actor, translates this into Macedonian, but we're not sure if it's translated correctly. it's a huge confusion whenever he writes an article. And it says that he quotes Mickoski as saying that Gruevski has been in touch with the current faction, ruling faction in SDSM, the Kovacevski group, not Zaev, Kovacevski, and with Ali Ahmeti, and that they were negotiating precisely this: pardons for Gruevski, pardon for himself, for people around him maybe, in exchange for Gruevski splitting the party, in one way maybe helping gather enough members of parliament to vote for the change of the constitution to adopt the Bulgarian demands. But if this fails, if Mickoski manages to hold on to his group in parliament, at least splitting the party before the general elections,
Right.
like running a separate list. At the same time, the mayor of Skopje, Daniel Arsovski, is apparently forming a party, so the Mickoski camp is alleging that Gruevski is doing this, that he is encouraging Danila, the mayor of Karposh, Stevche Akimovsky, to run for president, join Danila, that he's encouraging the Infomax boys to run a podcast, a show very negative of Mickoski, that he's encouraging Levica to join this effort. Like putting together like a decently sized right-wing nationalist faction that could take votes from VMRO, and then if SDSM manages to get the Albanians in a pre-election coalition, DUI and maybe the Alliance of Albanians, the elections would be even. So maybe even if nobody gets to 81 votes for the Bulgarian amendments, even after the elections, at least SDSM would win another election. There is a weird interview with Ahmeti, two weird interviews in which he's for the first time asked by US Embassy affiliated journalists, the 360 people, whether about his corruption. They're citing all the businesses his family owns, hundreds of millions of euros in government approved contracts. And he responds by saying, he's trying to play dumb on this. He immediately orders another interview for himself to clean up his face. So there are two interviews dropping at the same time. And among other things, he mentions that VMRO was pushing for this law, and that there were communication between him, Ahmeti, Zaev, so this is further back in the day, and Gruevski about the amendments and pardons for VMRO people. So this is all dropping. Gruevski obviously goes ballistic. He tells Mickoski that, I've been quiet for so long. You have disrespected me for so long. I haven't done anything to harm you. Have not split your party, even though I could have. It's pretty clear that he could split the party badly. And he starts naming. So Mickoski starts getting VMRO officials like Antonio, Marian Djurchev, to express their support for Nikola. For Mickoski, to criticize Nikola. Yeah. Nikola continues to write Facebook posts about every VMRO official notable official, not the small potatoes, who joins Christian in this fight. Nikola also calls on the members of parliament not to vote for the Bulgarian amendments. And accuses Mickoski of being in touch with Zaev. So practically that we now have two factions in VMRO, two in SDSM. And they're coordinating with each other. On one hand, we have Mickoski and Zaev, which has been talked about for a long time, that Mickoski is hoping that Zaev will split SDSM in time for the elections, and that maybe in exchange for having his own candidate win the presidential elections, and then have pardons ready for Zaev and people in Zaev's entourage. So maybe VMRO boycotts the presidential elections, help a Zaev SDSM candidate win, or just try to split SDSM during this election in exchange for winning the general elections against the split SDSM. So this would be the Mickoski-Zaev unprincipled coalition. And then we would have the alleged Gruevski, Kovacevski, and Ahmeti unprincipled coalition in which Gruevski splits VMRO, helps Kovacevski and Ahmeti win the elections, gets a pardon for himself and his people, and maybe, maybe some influence over the government, or who knows.
Wow, well, that's quite a scenario, and thank you for laying that out, not only for our listeners, but for me as well. I've heard bits and pieces of that, especially during my time in Macedonia over the past couple of weeks. But one of the operating theories, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is all kind of orchestrated in one way or another by Kale and the State Department.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
of course.
It's under the old rubric of divide and conquer, basically. So, perhaps
it looks a little bit like the return of Ljuba Boškovski, another former VMRO official who was hounded out of the country by a U.S. ambassador, allegedly in the trunk of a car, what SDSM and are alleging about Gruevski, and then returned to Macedonia at a convenient time to harm Gruevski, when Gruevski was becoming too strong and too stubborn for the Americans, for the State Department's taste. And then all of a sudden the charges against Boškovski are dropped. He's found not guilty. He returns to Macedonia to cause trouble. You couldn't tell where the U.S. embassy, like in Budapest or in Belgrade, where they want to cause trouble for the conservative ruling party. There is always a nationalist faction that shows up, and to be even more nationalist than, let's say, Orban or Vučić, and criticize the Americans. But, you can tell that the Americans are kind of happy with the situation. So in this case, it would be, if this is the case, if they are orchestrating, and, Gruevski, they don't even have to ask him about anything. And he even argued that at one point, so Mickoski is alleging that there is evidence that was a meeting between Zaev, Talat Jaferi, Kovacevski, Ahmeti, Talat Jaferi, Stevo Pendarovski, and that that Ahmeti initiated, let's reach out to Gruevski and let's bring him back into the country and cause problem for VMRO. And allegedly, because this is a meeting at the president's office, there's supposed to be a person taking notes, like in that famous scene in The Wire, where they're taking notes during the discussion of a drug deal. And Gruevski said, if you have this evidence, this was done without my acknowledgement, them asking me to do this. But they don't even have to ask him. I mean, even this is possible, that they're planning, we'll just bring him back and we'll make it look like we are in talks and negotiations. Maybe not even make it look like we're in negotiations too much, because it would harm him as a politician. We can just bring him back, exceptionally cynical ploy. We can drop charges against him. He doesn't have to return. We'll just show that we are dropping charges against him. We know that his relationship with Mickoski has been bad for a long time, but they kept it, relatively hidden from the public. And we'll just try to divide VMRO in this fashion.
Well, I need to, speaking of Nicola, I need to, on one of these trips, I need to make a run up to Hungary, just because, well, partly because I have relatives up there, second cousins, in Budapest and Debrecen and other place, but also maybe I should go see Nicola and see what's going on.
Yeah, unless he's in Skopje.
Well,
hopefully, this is a great injustice. It should be.
Here's the funny thing about this. So let's run for a few minutes with the theory that this is all organized, by Kale, the State Department, and that they're doing this and they want to divide it, and they're fine to have Nicola come back. It's under the headline of "Be careful what you wish for, because you may get it."
Oh yeah.
So they know a lot. They, meaning the State Department writ large, know a lot, obviously, but they don't know everything, and they're not Macedonians, and they live in a bubble, and if Nikola were to come back, nobody really knows what would happen. I mean, I guess the parallel for me is look at what's going on with Trump right now over here in the United States. So leading candidate on the Republican side for president next year, Biden leading, although dead, candidate for the Democrats for president next year. And right now, and all the firepower of the we'll just call it the deep state is directed towards Trump with all of the cases against him, etc. And every new indictment seems to make him more popular. And they're trying to put a stake through his heart, and yet right now he's leading Biden in a theoretical matchup by almost 10 percentage points, which is gigantic. And so, despite the best efforts of the deep state to get rid of Trump, they're succeeding in making him ever more popular every day, despite all of his many faults. So it could be the same type of situation where the deep state or the State Department is doing the same thing here, and yet Nikola comes back, and then he's more popular than ever, and he unites the left and the right, and finally takes care of Dewey and puts them where they should be, which is in a pit. And Macedonia goes on to greater and greater heights. Who knows? It's impossible to know the future. But if that's the game the State Department is playing, well, they may get what they wish for.
Yeah, they are. The Democrat media in the U.S. is desperately hoping for Trump to win. So there might be, Hillary was hoping for him to win. So there might be some also actual sincere work on the part of the left in the U.S. to have him at least the nominee, if not win the elections. And I would joke here that considering all the charges against Trump, it looks like, the deep state was practicing on Macedonia, using it as a testing ground, as a small test tube to see how a much greater chain of persecution against the leader of the opposition in the US would play out, which of his followers will join him, what type of a candidate would run against him, when the party would split, in what factions. I mean, it's not culturally very similar, but still, as with the storming of the parliament, where we were watching the storming of Capitol Hill, and
Right.
we already knew how this is going to play out. Now Trump is going to condemn them. Now they're going to make him look weak for condemning them. There are informants in the crowd, etc. But yeah, it's a big mess. There is still no outspoken support for Gruevski over Mickoski from officials in the party. Nobody who didn't already split from Mickoski when we already had, Mialkov, who dragged 8 members of parliament over the Prespa Treaty. This was kept at an arm's length from Nikola. So he was not visibly involved in this, even though, Mialkov is his cousin. So this was not pinned on Nikola, but on Mialkov. He managed to avoid having this pinned on him. So we have officials are either supporting Mickoski at the moment or staying silent over the whole thing. But we can tell that some on the SDSM side are now commenting how Nikola, he might help about this major pro-European push, which is the changing of as they describe, the amending of the constitution. So this is now splitting SDSM as well, because their people are saying, okay, so what are we doing now? We're bringing Nikola back just to pass amendments that and continue on this path of declaring the Macedonian nation actual Bulgarians. This is what we're doing now. This is our party. This is what we've come to. So there was a funny development where the mayor of Skopje, Petar Šilegov, who is part of Shekerinska's faction in SDSM, the Skopje wing of the faction, of the party, he says, well, maybe, he went even further into conspiracy theory. According to him now, Mickoski and Gruevski are feigning an argument, feigning a dispute. This would make it appear so that a group of members of parliament will be handpicked and they will vote for the amendments. Mickoski will blame Gruevski on all of this. In exchange, he will get pardons for everybody, but he will probably stay in Budapest, not return to Skopje, but he will be clean, his people will be saved. And so obviously the US presiding over this agreement, and SDSM involved because, the journalist asked him, okay, but why are you playing along with this? Your party voted for the amendments. VMRO did not. You proposed them, you rushed them through parliament in an express procedure. So if they are pretending to be in a dispute, then you are also pretending to be in a dispute, and the remaining principled, colored revolution protesters are now outraged because they're bringing Gruevski back. They would release Kordana Yankulovska, Miliana Kievska, if this plays out in this way, just to stay in power with, and possibly not even stay in power because they would not be able to avoid elections. And in the elections, it would be a race whose party is more fractured. Is it VMRO or SDSM? Or if SDSM is more fractured but manages to get an Albanian partner like Dui to support them, then it's even worse than losing power. It would be actually being a minor coalition, a smaller coalition partner to the Albanians. It could be a complete disaster for the country and for their party. So it's very, very ugly.
Let's talk just about kind of dates, the calendar, and tie that in with all this. So the so-called amendments are supposed to be passed by what? I think it's November, I believe. Okay.
Yeah.
And if they're not, then there's this thought that Albania is going to be separated from Macedonia in terms of the accession process. Although, if going back to, you mentioned Michael Martin's a bit ago, and his epic thread from September 20 on Twitter, which I just pulled up, he's talking about the Greece has a problem with Albania right now over I think some individual or the treatment of Greeks in Albania. So
yeah, they arrested the mayor, a Greek mayor in a large city in Greece, in Albania, in southern Albania.
So Greece might put a veto on Albania. So
yeah, but unlikely.
Well, this is what Michael says. He says, no danger of decoupling between Albania and Macedonia, as both countries might soon be stuck together in brotherly harmony on their European path. So we got November. Okay. There's still, next week is October. We are recording this on Sunday, the 24th of September. So November is 5 weeks away, beginning of November. Yep. And then we've got elections next year. And I know I've asked about this before, and I can't keep it straight in my head, even though I was just there. Parliamentary elections, presidential elections are both.
It was April and June, I think. April presidential, parliamentary June.
And those are required. These aren't early. That's the normal flow.
Yeah.
Then the question becomes, would they? The closer we get to the dates, the likelihood of them being quote unquote early is diminishing. Because it doesn't make any sense. And then the main question becomes: do you hold them both together at the same time? There's a political element to that. There's a fiscal element to that in terms of the cost. I would say there's a what's the right word I'm looking for? People would be fatigued by having two major elections in 2 months. Basically, is it better just to throw them all together? And those are things that we're going to see play out over the coming months. But first up is the November issue. Of course, just to parallel it, since I mentioned Trump and Biden and how that kind of, what's going on there with what's going on in Macedonia, our primary elections for both the Republicans and the Democrats begin in late January, early February. I think a few of them have been changed. With the elections a year from November. And then all the court cases against Trump in the meantime. So for both of our countries, welcome to the silly season on steroids. So
if the elections are not coupled, they're not held together, like let's say in April early elections along with the presidential, Mickoski has threatened, he's not said he'll boycott, but he strongly insists that they're held together. Because he fears that if the original process was considered like, let's say, if the VMRO and it's much easier for SDSM to form a pre-election coalition with the Albanians for presidential elections. They already done this. They already have precedent of the Albanian parties supporting the SDSM candidate in exchange for promises and perks. So then it's very possible, it's likely that even if VMRO beats SDSM by a lot, they still lose if all the Albanians vote for the SDSM candidate in the second round. So it's a winning option for Mickoski either to, and then he would go into general elections as a loser, right? Of yet another election. He already lost 2 presidential and 1 general and only won 1 local election so far. So then he would hope these are coupled. But the way he was saying this, it kind of opens the door for VMRO to boycott the election, says this is extra cost. They can come up with some reason to call for a boycott. But then this would open a door for another SDSM candidate, for Zaev. Zaev can now officially come out and say Kovacevski. So we could have another split in a major party. He could say Kovacevski is pardoning Gruevski. We'll all see this. This is my crowning achievement, putting him not in prison, but in exile, arresting all these people from his party. And now he just wants to throw all of this away to then only form a government with even more Albanians in it. So the rumors were that Zaev was negotiating with Mickoski to have a grand Macedonian coalition, Zaev's faction of SDSM and Mickoski's VMRO. So then Albanians would stop ordering us around, including in the business realm, where they're taking major businesses such as Ahmeti was being asked about oil and gas. His people bought the Ilovica plant copper mine, not to mention the Bechtel highway deal, which is billions in construction contracts. So Zaev can say Kovacevski is pissing on my achievement of justice for the corrupt VMRO people. He is giving the country to the Albanians. So he could run a candidate, and it was mentioned either himself or Venko Filipče, who could have a chance against an SDSM DUI supported candidate, especially VMRO boycotts, but are told, let's play along this card that we are dividing SDSM before the elections. Let's support the other SDSM candidate, the more pro-Macedonian one, shall we say. This is why Filipče is suddenly facing so many criminal charges for the burning of the hospital in Tetovo, where Albanians died. So the Albanian parties would say, you want to be president, but you built a hospital out of cardboard and killed 14 of our people. About the scandal with the sale of chemotherapy drugs, etc. So we don't know if there will be one or several SDSM candidates. Now, if VMRO runs a candidate, there could be another, let's say, pro-Gruevski, if Gruevski is really doing this candidate, such as Stefče Akimovski. Even if Gruevski is not involved, Stefče Akimovski is making statements that he supports Gruevski, that he was the greater leader, that he's very anti-Mickoski at this moment. So he could appeal to the Gruevski faction of VMRO to split the vote. So it's a complete mess. It would be the presidential elections would be a complete mess, but also a card for, let's say, Mickoski's faction to bring Zaev on board, or even for the Kovacevski faction to repay favors to Albanians, or even, to Gruevski and ask for their support in dividing the, let's say, the opposing party in the general elections, which would happen afterwards.
Well, I don't think, as a matter of principle, that VMRO should boycott the presidential elections. I think that's a bad idea, but far too early.
But it's a matter of tactics.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, we'll have to wait and see on that.
And if there is shooting in Kosovo, then we might be pressed, listen, we have to do this. We can't leave any insecurity about the country, as we were warned by Escobar and who was the other EU official? They would warn us now more and more about instability, Russian. Now this would be declared as a Russian Wagner attack on Kosovo. So, listen, guys, we have to vote on this immediately. The country is at stake, look what's happening in Kosovo. Then we'll get a lot of perks. We'll get quick EU membership, even though it will be a light version of EU membership, which will not even resemble actual EU membership. But yeah, there will be something along these lines as well.
Yeah. Huh. All right.
They will scare us with stability, instability.
Exactly. All right. Watch this space, I guess, is the only thing to say. So, I go back and I think of the first president of Estonia once they regained their independence in '91, Lennart Meri. I believe it was Lennart Meri who said that his wish for Estonia was just to be another normal, boring European country.
Yeah.
And that's my wish for Macedonia. It's just to be another normal, boring European country, with all of the the culture and history and everything else that makes it unique. But just too much going on there. And just to take a step back, the 30,000-foot, 10,000-meter perspective, just to take a step back, both for Macedonia and for the United States. I guess, and for our listeners, I guess our listeners are people who follow this stuff and are interested in it. That's good, and hopefully we provide some laughs and some useful news and information and perspective. But obviously, politics should not be a major part of your life unless, of course, you do it for a living. And you don't, and I don't. We do this because we're political creatures, I guess, to a degree. But we're smart enough to know that you've got to have. There's much more to life than this, and politics shouldn't be that big of a part of your life, and it shouldn't dictate your happiness, or in this case your sadness, or your depression. It's something that happens, and on an individual basis, there's not a whole lot we can do. I think in Macedonia, being a smaller country, one actor can do a lot more than here. And to be honest, I don't follow politics here that much anymore. I follow the headlines, obviously, and what's going on, but actually, no. Let me rephrase that. I follow it, but I care less and less each day. Because I know there's nothing that can be done. We're stuck, I think, with the Trump and the Biden families for at least another. Well, actually, not with the Biden families, because Joe Biden's going to drop dead within the next few years.
You don't see a presidential run for Hunter?
But even when Biden drops dead, there's still all the issues regarding his family, similar to the Ahmeti and Gruevski and Zaev crime families. The Biden crime family, with James Biden as Joe Biden's brother, Hunter Biden, of course, the Trump second son, even Hunter's former girlfriend, which was his late brother Beau's wife. Hunter had a relationship.
Alabama.
Appalachian. Hunter had a relationship there. I mean, there's 7 or 8 or 9 members of the Biden family that have profited off of Hunter's escapades, shall we say, with China and Romania and Ukraine, and the only question is whether Joe Biden has himself. But
and possibly contributed to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. So possibly, but so the Biden himself might not be around, but his family members are, and there's all these scandals regarding them. Same thing with Ahmeti. Ahmeti's not going to live much longer, but it seems like he has his nephews, his brothers, his wives, his mistresses, whatever it is he's got. Everybody in his family seems to be involved in crime in Macedonia. So, and again, there's not much that we can do about it. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is, you can follow it, but to find true contentment and joy in life, certainly focus on your family, your friends, and everything else, which is what I did when I was in Macedonia recently. I spent, I'm using air quotes right now. I call it my job, quote unquote. 10, 11 hours a day, I just go and sit down with people and talk and eat and drink and don't exercise enough, but that's okay. I do that when I get back home, and I just really enjoy it, despite all of these issues that we've just talked about over the past 40 minutes or so. So I guess that's the headline. Yeah.
My wish for all of this was completely different. It's actually playing out just as I hoped it will, because my big fear was that we will become a boring country after all the arrests of VMRO people, after the Color Revolution, that there really is a plan that we will be allowed to join the EU, but with some dignity, without too much pressure, maybe the Greeks will not be overly aggressive in the name change, or the Bulgarians were not even on the radar of anybody for this level of pressure, this type of a dispute, and that it will some investments will come. I did not obviously foresee the inflation or the war or anything like that, and that it will appear that Gruevski was an idiot, that we were all idiots to believe him, that we should have made the deal much sooner, become on our terms without going to prison or giving the country to the Albanians as part of the name and identity change. This was my fear, that even if he's not actively lying to us, that he misread or misnegotiated the issues, and that when he would tell us, listen guys, we can't accept this, it's going to be a disaster, that he was overdoing it, that he was in the wrong. And it played out precisely as he was warning us, and as we were in turn warning others, that it's going to be a complete disaster. We will never get, we won't get anything we hope for, and that we'll lose our country. And it's exactly as it's playing out. And after Prespas, this negotiation started with the Bulgarians. My wish was that we have a repeat of Prespa, that it's dirty, that it's ugly, that it destroys whatever remaining credibility the EU integration process has in the eyes of the people, because this is what killed us in 2001, in 2004, for the referendum on borders of municipalities vis-a-vis Macedonians and Albanians, in 2015 with the Color Revolution, that there was a wellspring of people who still believed the EU, still believed the US, when they would promise us dignity, but also jobs, but fight against corruption, justice for all. And it's these people and these organizations and their credibility in the country. Okay, this was seasoned with a lot of money from the USAID OTI office, from Soros, etc. But still, there were some people who, in the end, this group lost in the elections, both times, in 2016 and in 2020. But they were able to shenanigan things with the Albanian votes, Albanian parties. But there was still a bump, at least in 2016 in the elections, which cost us our country. So I really want this to be exceptionally dirty and ugly, counting on that it will primarily damage SDSM again. VMRO has gone through factions, has gone through divisions, but VMRO does not play these games, honestly. It's not invested in the EU process working, and has not made promises that are unrealistic and are not coming true. They're bribed, they're pressured, they're arrested. They may go along under pressure, but they're not the useful idiots here. And obviously my expected outcome is that because the trials, the persecution of the VMRO people and the protesters in parliament were a huge travesty and a huge injustice, that the people currently in prison will be released primarily. This means both the protesters like Janacento and Gordana and Mila and the other officials who are in prison. That Nikola will be able to come back, that the cases against him will be dropped in some form, I don't care what. Whether he will return is up to him, but that he will be able to travel freely. Now this is another problem. So that people like Zaev, Verushevsky, people from the Soros group here, that they get their comeuppance. This is where Mickoski's offer, his offer is better when it comes to the election. So he's promising, I want to beat SDSM and DUI and rule for the next 4 to 8 years, while Gruevski's promise is not realistically we will win, my faction will win. It's more like I may divide, if he's doing this, and I said there is a lot of ifs here, I will divide VMRO, I will be allowed to have the cases dropped against me, a lot of people will be out of prison, we'll have a better VMRO under a different candidate. So his offer is weaker, obviously, in this regard, when deciding between Mickoski and Gruevski days, months before the election. But then Mickoski's offer is I will win by dividing SDSM, but I'm bringing in the weaker faction in SDSM at the moment, and that's Zaev. So Shekerinska is out of the picture. She's not in government. Zaev is kind of actively maybe conspiring against the government. So this means we amnesty Zaev, we amnesty Shekerinska. We'll probably end up in some kind of coalition with them. And we will have to, this very important part which I mentioned, defeat the SDSM Soros faction, which keeps screwing up the country by promising an EU future. We have nobody left to defeat there. We'll co-opt them, the worst of them. We didn't even know who Kovacevski is. Like, I had to Google his ass when he was named prime minister.
Right.
I had no idea who this person is. And our victory will be we put what? Kovacevski in prison? His wife? That's stupid. We need people like Zaev, Verushevsky to get their comeuppance. Mickoski is even praising Verushevsky, the family. Like that's a problem. So these are my wishes in order of importance. The people get out of prison. Nikolai has his cases dropped. And then we exact justified revenge against the people who brought us here. What happens to the country afterwards? I mean, this is no way, in no pipe dream is this going to be like a safe and prosperous and boring country with our demographics, with our neighborhood, with things happening. We're just checking the news in the morning, Russia, Ukraine, to see which side will be, come on top, and do we start attacking, do we start fighting the Albanians, or will they start fighting us, whichever side gets stronger in the end in the war in Ukraine. It will determine who will start the next round in the Balkans, but there will be a next round in the Balkans, that's for sure. So yeah, this is my expectation. So far it's going well. I mean, I want the process damaged, the promises of justice and fight against corruption under the EU-US flag discredited. I want the promises of European future if we make concessions discredited, the promises of good relations with neighbors if we make concessions discredited. This is all that Zaev promised. And some justice would be these people ending up behind bars.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Yeah. It's pretty good so far. Pretty entertaining.
Again, politics should not be entertainment. But I hear you. I know what you're saying. It's. I think if it's any consolation, I think the world is entering a more dangerous and destabilizing time than any time in the past since the end of World War II. I read a lot of history. The history of the world is not one of peace. It's one of war, continuous wars. That's human nature. Man is sinful. Man is fallen. We are all part of the crooked timber of humanity. That's just the way it is. And in that, let me see if I can pull a positive note out of this crushing morosity. In that, we need to be just really grateful for the times when we don't have to think about politics, or we don't have to live through it, or all of these things that we've just talked about that are going on. We can just sit down and enjoy family, enjoy friends, maybe have a little vacation, find out what your kid's learning at school, and just go to church and worship. All of these things that really are the more important things that make life worth living. So.
Yeah, but we have family and friends in prison, or charged,
True.
or people have died over this. I have friends who have died over this.
Life is unfair, always has been, always will be, and that's just the way it is. But
we need to see this through. We need to see this through to the end.
Yeah.
If for no other reason, just to mess up their plans and have them break up and laugh at them in the end.
It'll happen. Trust me, it'll happen.
If we can't beat them, at least we can ruin make their victory.
Oh, come on! I was trying to end on a positive note. No, okay. Well, maybe.
There is no. We can't. I mean, the best case scenario, as I said, even SDSM are telling themselves, okay, maybe they're pretending that they're in a fight. So we have. It's very difficult for anybody involved here to end up looking nice.
Yeah. All right.
The internationals, the local actors, the Albanians are not even trying. Right. Obviously, it's very. I don't know. I don't see how they will end up as a positive, not a tragic figure in all of this.
All right. Well, let's do this. We didn't plan on this podcast, but it came up because of the events that we've just spent 50 minutes talking about, basically. So. We will kind of follow this. We'll follow the news in what's going on next door, because that always has the possibility of spilling over here and there. Apparently, Vucic is supposed to be giving a press conference here in the next few hours, though by the time you hear this, it'll all be come and gone. But anyway, we will we'll keep following this, and we'll look forward to our next podcast. And who knows? It could be in a couple of days. It could be in 2 weeks.
Yeah, if they have internet in the refugee camp.
All right. Well, I appreciate the time. This is good to catch up and find out what's going on. And we'll, like I said, we'll just keep following it.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Take care. Bye.